So today we're going to look at some of the bits and pieces that are connected to the engine of my MGBGT Autocrosser that I've either built or modified to try to save a little weight or hopefully gain a little bit of horsepower. Let's get going. So we're going to start with the exhaust and header specifically, and how I got to where I am now with this one that I built. When I first bought my car, well, quite frankly, it was a rusty piece of crap. And I'd done tons and tons of fabrication and welding on it, mostly because I was broke and I wanted to learn these cars because I wanted to start a business eventually working on them and restoring them. And what better way to do it than to start with a rusty piece of crap and completely rebuild it? But since I was broke, I had to do a lot of building of things to try to save money, but also it helped me to hone my skills, which was at least half the reason why I decided to build as many things as I did, is I had a lot of techniques that I knew about and I've read about, but hadn't actually tried yet, because I was working in a metal shop and welding shop, but it was doing heavy stuff, not sheet metal work. So when I first got my car, gosh, close to 30 years ago now, I don't even think I had an exhaust manifold with it. But I did have a parts pile, long center branch header that I believe I got for free. Somebody gave me. And being that I was from a family that was a GM family, we raced at the local 3/8 mile oval track, and we were all NASCAR fans. The general consensus was headers are always better, so that went on. And the fact that I don't think I even had the rest of the exhaust system, for me, it was easier to go ahead and hook up to a header and build something out rather than trying to find an exhaust manifold and a front pipe, because like I said, I was broke. So that worked well for me at the time, just to get the car together and up and running. Now, in the 20 some odd years since then, I have read Peter Burgess's book, How to Power Tune the MGB 4-cylinder engine, and in his book he states that the manifold that comes on the MGB is actually a very good design and flows very well, and very few headers actually improve on that. Which kind of goes against my general thoughts from my background. But once I had it on there, I was sticking with it, because once I got to the point where any kind of performance was a big thing for me, or I actually had any money to try to buy something with, I was interested in autocrossing, and I figured the weight savings alone was worth sticking with this. So I've stuck with it. Once I started competing and actually getting competitive, and because of my background and the way my dad always worked, he was never happy with the car as it was, and I was never happy. I was always trying to make things a little bit better, trying to figure out how to go a little faster, make a quarter horsepower more, whatever it took to just improve constantly. And I started doing some testing one day after losing a trophy position by like 15 thousandths of a second. I started thinking, wait, if the car weighed 10, 20 pounds less, I might have gotten that trophy. Or if I had, another horsepower or whatever, because it takes that little bit of a difference to make a few thousandths or hundredths of a difference in your lap times. So one of the things I started doing was started testing. Had this header on here, and I tried like an MGA manifold because I read or heard that you could have a little more torque with that. And I threw that on, tried it, and nah, didn't like that at all. And I don't remember if I had a factory manifold at the time to play with or not, but I did start playing with the length of the header here. I started taking a page from NASCAR, and I thought I would lengthen the collector. Because originally it was about that long. And I think I tried a few different lengths, and I settled on this length here as the final length. But when I lengthened this and took it out for a drive, it did, in my eyes, feel a lot better. Now, I have no hardcore data. I had no lap times to compare it to, because with autocrossing, the course is never the same anyway, so you can't compare lap times ever. I didn't have any kind of set course. I didn't have a dyno, nothing to actually test it with. It was just my perception of what the car was doing. But when I put this on and took it down the road, the old butt dyno said, "Hell yeah!" That felt a lot better. Now, there's a caveat here. Your oral sensations can make you feel like you're going faster. So this completely changed the sound of the car, especially above, say, I don't know, 2,500 RPM, something like that. It's been 20 years since I did this, so I don't really remember exactly. But from right around 2,500 on, boy, did that motor just sound, I guess you could say, angrier, and felt like it really woke that thing up. And even if it was just, it sounded better, I sure felt it was faster. So I stuck with this. And at the time I had like my own home-built muffler, like a Flowmaster 40 series muffler on it. I always enjoyed how it sounded. It sounds a little different. But at the time, that motor was a 30 over engine, just balanced, like an 18-pound flywheel, stock cam, and about 9¼ to 1 compression because I had a late head on early block. So it was nothing special, but it really felt like it woke it up. But then later on, I decided I wanted to go more. So I was ready to start stepping things up and take it from a 30 over engine to a 60 over engine, get the compression up a little higher, and put some cam into it. So I figured I'd build a new header, and this is what I ended up building right here. It is a little bit of a different design, still a long center branch, and it actually is the same size header, 1 9/16 tubing up to the Y pipe here, up to the Y here, and then from here back it's 1 3/4, and then this whole center one is 1 3/4. But what I did was I made sure that the length of this and the length of this was the same. And actually these are a little longer than this one. But then the length of this pipe is much closer to the total length of this run than this one is. And the conventional wisdom is equal length header equals more power. So that's what I was going with at the time. And one of the other little tricks that I have done on this header was something that my dad had talked to me about, which was one of his theories that also is many other people's theories as well. It's actually fairly well known nowadays. But when I had this all made, I had a flange. I took a gasket and took it and had it water jet cut towards the whole thing. So I made the intake flange and exhaust flange all in one shot, built the intake and exhaust all together on the side of an engine that I had up on the workbench with little bars that I bolted to it here and there to show where the steering shaft was, where the frame rail was, the corner of the firewall, all that stuff, so I could build it outside the car and know that it would fit in the car. This flange here is actually just a little bit bigger than the gasket. But then the port on the head is ported to the point where it's just a little bit smaller than the gasket. The idea being, or the theory, is that as the exhaust gases go out the port, there's room for expansion here. And as it expands, it helps to scavenge and draw out the exhaust gases out of the cylinder. And that's the same idea with stepping the header up from 1.9 to 1.75 here. But I also did this the rest of the way down the exhaust system. So this is my exhaust system. And actually, because I was autocrossing, I made it pretty lightweight. I started out with a muffler that I built myself that was like a Flowmaster 40 series, but fit in the area I wanted it to fit in. Which, yes, this is under the seat, not in the back. Which does totally change the sound of it because of the positioning of where it's at. But coming here, it's 2" into the muffler. Then it's 2¼ going out. Now this is my third muffler I built for this car. The first one was really heavy. And then I traded it for a set of used race tires and built myself a lightweight muffler. Turns out that one I made a little too thin. So I made a new one that's a little bit heavier so that it wouldn't crack out on me like the second one did. But this one's made like the Flowmaster Delta Flow rather than the 40 series. But it's 2¼ inches out. Then once it gets past the rear axle, it actually steps up to 2½ all the way out. So the idea is at each step it expands a little bit more and helps scavenge all the way out. Now whether it's actually helping me or not, I don't know, but in theory it should be. But it does give my car a fairly unique sound. It is a bit loud, but I like it that way. And most people, when I go in someplace and no one's ever seen my car before and I pull in someplace, they actually don't believe it's the stock engine. They think I've swapped it with something else because this does give it a nice, good, low, bassy note and makes it sound like it's actually a bigger engine than it really is. Of course, once this thing's back up and running again, hopefully we'll get some good audio of what it sounds like. Now the next thing, as part of the build of the header, was I also built a new intake manifold. I've been looking at the Maniflow intake manifolds and I wanted to get one of those, but I didn't want to spend the money on it. But also, when they make their manifolds, they make them to fit HS4s and not for HIF4s. I've always run HIF4s on my car with a manifold vacuum distributor, and they don't have a vacuum port on theirs. So I didn't want to change to a different distributor and different carbs. I wanted to keep those the same, so I made my own. The biggest difference between their manifolds and my manifold is I kept this angle at 15 degrees because I was running HIFs. They run theirs at 10 degrees, so it's a little flatter. But with the HS4s, you can change the angle of the float bowl to account for that degree change, and they sell the bits to do that. But I also added a port here for vacuum and a standoff here that holds the throttle cable bracket for the HIF carbs. Now I currently don't have the HIF carbs on it because I did actually end up switching to a set of HS carbs just to play with. They had the early pistons and I could try a bunch of different sets of needles to try to just find out what was going to fit. Meanwhile, my HIFs are actually on my buddy's MGA because his motor is set up pretty darn close to what my other one had. And so we threw mine onto his car for initial break-in and of the engine and stuff because we knew it would be jetted just about right. Maniflow states their manifolds are good for 3 to 5 horsepower on just about any engine they've ever tested. The biggest reason for that, if you look at the stock manifold, if you really get in here and you look, this whole area here, that whole top of this manifold here is all open and disrupts the flow quite a bit. This one here has a much, much smaller hole and it's on a 45, not the whole top of it here. So it disrupts the flow much less. Now you're not going to get quite as much of a balance signal, but you really don't need a really large balance signal like that. What I'm giving up at low RPM, I'm, okay with. So is this still giving me like say 3 to 5 horsepower? I don't know. It's never been tested, but if it's still getting me say 2 to 3, I'll take it. So now we're going to start looking at some of the stuff I've done for weight savings. One of the little things I've done was, you got your water pump here. I used to always run the aluminum water pumps, and I had a whole bunch of them laying around because they don't make them new, or at least the Moss doesn't provide them new in cast iron. And I kept a bunch of them around so that if one started leaking, I could throw another one on it or whatever. But I broke this ear off of a couple of them running a GM alternator, and I got tired of that and threw a cast iron on there eventually when I wasn't racing much. But this whole pattern here is the one I don't use. I use these, so I've drilled those out a little bit. Helps save just a tiny bit of rotational mass. But where I really save mass is the pulley here. So this is the stock pulley that used to look like this. It's just I've put it on a lathe, cleaned it up quite a bit. So I took the whole groove off of here, then I actually faced it off a little bit, and then kind of cleaned this face up a little bit, the inside here and across the back. Now, how much weight savings was that? Well, here's a stock pulley. 1 pound, just a little shy of 13 ounces. A little over 14.5 ounces. That is close to 1 pound of weight, and that's rotational mass. Takes horsepower to turn it. And one of the other little things I've done, thermostat housing. This is the replacement thermostat housing for the, the mid-year cars, the 72 to 74 range stuff, which actually I think it's 68 to 74, but without the bracket. This is the home market version that Moss sells. It's aluminum. Now it weighs a little over 4 ounces. Here is a stock one. Of course, this one's broken. It's the only one I can find anywhere around the shop. I had a whole bucket of these things, of all the styles, everything, all the 3 different versions of the B, the MGA, different versions of the midget ones, even some for like those sedans, like the Metropolitan and stuff like that. And we had sorted through them all before I moved to the new shop, had them all in a bucket, with the ones I was going to keep, and I think it didn't make it over here. I've never been able to find that bucket since I moved. So, yay, loss of a lot of good parts there. But the only one I have is got a piece missing out of it, so it's going to weigh a little less. 1 pound, just over 3.5 ounces. So if that was there, it'd probably be about 1 pound 4 ounces. So there's a 1 whole pound of difference between these two. And since I was trying to get weight out of the front of the car, to me, that mattered. And then I went a little crazy, and this is my alternator mount. This didn't save much weight, but hey, you know, 3.5 ounces versus 5 ounces on, you know, something like that. So, you know, that's only 1.5 ounces. That ain't much, but I've done that 1.5 ounce thing on a lot of bits. So I saved a lot of weight over the time. And I get a little bit, stuff like that tends to happen when I'm under a lot of stress. Like when I was getting divorced or when my dad was sick, stuff like that. I'll tend to focus on things like this. It keeps my mind occupied, keeps me sane, more so than, you know, really making the car faster. But in the long run, you do enough of these things, ounces add up to pounds, pounds add up to going faster. And one of the other things I did was I went to the Datsun 280Z transmission. Now I haven't seriously autocrossed since I put that in. When I won my 2 championships, I was still actually on an overdrive transmission. And the 280Z transmission not only weighs quite a bit less than, especially in overdrive, but the gear ratios are so much better. I used to run out of gear in 2nd gear and be just parking it on the rev limiter. And that's why I have an MSD box on my car, was to have more for the rev limiter than anything else. But I would just, if I grabbed 3rd gear, I would generally slow down because the length of our courses, I would just barely be getting the 3rd and then back into 2nd, and I was wasting more time than I was gaining. So I would just hit the rev limiter, hold it to the floor, and until I went into the next corner, and I was faster that way. But I had already made a backing plate for my car myself. I had made it out of not 6061 T6, but actually a marine grade equivalent to that, because that's what the local supplier had on hand in the right thickness when I went to go buy it. But I had saved myself, I think it was 14 pounds just with the backing plate alone. But when I did the 5-speed conversion, this backing plate is 1/2 inch thick rather than 3/8 thick. So it weighed more than the one I was taking off, and I had a problem with that. So this has been modified. It has been cut now to fit exactly. I bolted this to the bell housing and scribed the edge of the bell housing and cut this to exactly the shape of the bell housing rather than all the straight bits. And from here down, and cut all this out and bits here just to get some weight out of it. And then up here, between the bell housing and the top of the block, I drilled these holes in it. And then I took the later bell housings has a hole here on the one side with a rubber plug in it in order to get to the bell converter bolts for the automatic transmission that they thought they were going to be able to sell here in America, which obviously they didn't. Nobody wanted them. So I located that, put that hole in it, and then duplicated a mirror image on the other side just to take a little bit of weight out to get it closer to the weight of the one that I took out. Still weighs more, but I did what I could. So in addition to having the aluminum back plate, if you've seen some of my engine build videos, you'll see that I got aluminum front plate on the engine as well. And there's some other little bits yet on the car, not connected to the engine, that I've done as well. But I also built aluminum core support for me. And now I was a little bit disappointed in how much weight it saved, but at the time I thought it was a fun project to make one out of aluminum, regardless of what weight savings there was. And then this here is for the Moss cold air intake. Now, unfortunately, the Moss cold air intake as it comes isn't really a cold air intake because you're still sucking from right here. So there's still a lot of heat there. So what I did was I made this piece here to go through the core support, and then I use a bit of brake cooling hose to go, cooling duct hose, to go from here to the actual intake, and it draws its air from in front of the radiator where you can actually get cold air. Now, I don't have my flywheel here right now. It's still at the machine shop because they haven't gotten my head or flywheel back to me just yet. But the flywheel, along with being smaller for the 280Z gearbox, has been lightened quite a bit. Initially, I'd taken 5 pounds out of the original flywheel for my car. And then as I was searching for that little bit more when I was autocrossing, I ended up taking it back to the machine shop. They did a little bit of touch-up work here and there to it and found a little bit more weight to get it down to, I think it was 17 pounds, something like that. But then, now that we got the 280Z, when I got that flywheel from Rivergate, I just took both flywheels and said, make this one match this one in all the modifications, and it came out to 15 pounds, 10 ounces. But now my old flywheel is in my buddy's MGA that currently has my carburetors on it. And that's a mild 30 over ported head, mild cam, 1800 B engine. So, and a pretty stripped down MGA, so it's a fun car as well. Now, all these modifications, how much performance does it actually make? I don't know. Nothing's been tested. You know, sometimes it's nice to live in your ignorance of believing how much performance you're actually gaining than to actually put some hard numbers to it and find out that it may not be as much as you thought. But one of the things I would like to do once after the motor's together and I get some tuning done to it and play around on the street a little bit, and when I think I have it kind of pretty zoned in, I'd like to try to make it so I've got my carburetors back from my buddy's car, and I have 2 sets of pistons and needles, because I'm actually going to build a hybrid set, use the HIF carb bodies, which I actually have another set of bodies I've been working on. Believe it or not, I've been lightening a little bit. It's a sickness, isn't it? But I'm going to use the HS pistons and needles and everything in it and build like a hybrid set. And I'd like to take it to the dyno and try maybe both sets, see what happens. I'll probably take it to the same dyno that I took an old vintage racer MGB that I worked on once. And if you were wondering, that one had a 80 over, I think it was 13-to-1 engine built by Hap Waldrop from Acme Speed Shop, and it put, was it 138 horsepower, I think it was, to the rear wheels. So that one was no slouch at all. Too bad the owner wasn't the right owner. He really didn't need that much engine at all, because all he was doing was just riding around and wanted to finish the race. And that's all he cared about. But car's since been sold on to somebody who hopefully is appreciating the motor that they got. But that's neither here nor there. Hopefully my engine in the current setup I got, maybe we'll get somewhere around 100 horsepower at the wheels. Yeah, it'd be really nice to see that. But I think with the 5-speed conversion that's in the car, I think that transmission is actually more efficient. Just changing that transmission alone will make your car feel faster because you're seeing less parasitic losses through that transmission than the original transmissions, especially if you're going from an overdrive like I was to that 5-speed. So it'd be interesting to see when we get there what it actually puts to the ground.